Support for this News from Lake Wobegon podcast comes from the Sleep Number bed by Select Comfort, the bed that lets you adjust the mattress firmness to your preference, your sleep number. And by Honey Nut Cheerios cereal, made with whole grain oats. Honey Nut Cheerios cereal can help lower your cholesterol. Honey Nut Cheerios. Be happy, be healthy.
Well, it's been a quiet week in Lake Wobegon, my hometown, up there on the prairie. It's been warm and beautiful. It's been just gorgeous, and everything suddenly turned green, and beautiful light canopy of green out in the woods suddenly got thick. We've had all kinds of rain the last few weeks. They've had drought off to the west of us, but we've had so much rain in Lake Wobegon, they're way behind in planting corn, which has driven the price of corn up to about $5 a bushel, much higher than it's ever been before, which makes all the farmers want to get out into the field and plant it, although they understand that it's the inability to get out into the field and plant it that is what keeps that price so high, which is just like life itself, isn't it? It is the impossibility of it that makes it so beautiful. I had a tremendous thunderstorm this last week, just a gorgeous thunderstorm. Came in the middle of the night, and it rattled the windows. Sat bolt upright in bed, feeling your whole house shake, and the room was just a brilliant white. The roof was blown off the Amit's house out north of town. Volunteer fire department had to go out there and get them and bring them into town. They made sandwiches for them at the Lutheran church, and had to put them up and sleep them in the Sunday school wing on the pew cushions. All 6 of the Amits lay there. They woke up late in the morning, sun streaming through the windows on them. They got up and they just hugged each other. See that they were all alive after they lost the roof off of their house. She said to him, she said, I tell you, in the past, Robert, she said, we've let petty things come between us. I've allowed petty things to make me angry at you, and I'm never going to be that way again. He said, like what, for example? She told him they didn't speak to each other for the rest of the day. Carl Krebsbach went out, and there wasn't too much damage to the house other than just water damage. They nailed a big, thick poly sheet over the roof. He's going to come in and fix it next week, but the sheet is very nice. You can look up at night and see the stars. Everything just suddenly turned green, and you went out this last week and started trying to clean the dandelions out of your yard, these amazing flowers. It seems as if just about 2 days after the last of the snow melts, the dandelion puts up blooms. And before other flowers have even started, it's dried into this beautiful crown of seeds. This gorgeous plant. You go out there and you dig away at these things. There's hundreds of them out across your yard. You go out there and you dig away at them, and you start to wonder. You think about all of these sort of delicate plants that you work so hard on in your garden, the pansies and the nasturtiums, and you look at this hardy perennial that will never be defeated or discouraged and keeps coming back. And you start to wonder if maybe you're taking the wrong side. If history isn't on the side of the dandelion, and if these other plants that we think we value are sort of like some old corrupt aristocracy that we're keeping going, though nature is trying to get rid of them. It's sort of like Pastor Inkvist's Aunt Bernice and her husband Earl, who went off to be Lutheran missionaries down in Paraguay. This is about 20 years ago. And they went down there to work among the Hano people. And they were tremendously happy when they got down there. They just thought the world of the Hano people there in the mountains of Paraguay, and their culture and their language and their songs. They were just absolutely joyful. hated to come back to America on furlough. They just were crazy about these people. And though it did seem as if their theology was taking a slight turn away from Lutheranism towards something less rigid. Earl came back and he preached once at Lake Wobegon Lutheran Church, and he seemed to be saying that all is one and God or whatever is within each one of us, and somewhere in the darkest night a candle glows. Bernice wrote a letter back to headquarters saying that they didn't want to come back for furlough anymore, that it was so dull and depressing back in America. And when they were down there in Paraguay, it just seemed as if they rejoiced all of the time. Well, this aroused suspicion at Lutheran headquarters. This is not like Lutherans, and so they sent a bishop down to investigate. And he discovered in short order that the Hanno people had been medicating Bernice and Earl for the past 20 years with the white powder of the Hanno Waha plant. They put it in their coffee, and Bernice and Earl, being Lutherans, drank coffee throughout the day. And it kept them higher than a kite. He pointed this out to them, and they said, no, they said, that's sugar. Well, he said, I think we better take this back to America for testing. So he got on a plane, and he flew back to Miami, where he was arrested by a border agent with a dog who specializes in sniffing Hanawaha. Unfortunately, the bishop is terrified of dogs, going back to when he was a paper boy, and so he tried to make a run for it. And when they discovered the plastic bag full of Hanawaha in his shaving kit and asked him what it was, and he said he was bringing it back for testing, the agents looked at each other with that sort of light smile of people who have heard a joke many times before. Well, Bernice and Earl came back from Paraguay, and they were assigned to a church out in western Nebraska, where they've been for the last 15 years. And it's been 15 years of sheer depression for them ever since they came back. 15 years of depression. Every week they go into Omaha to a psychiatrist's office, and they sit there and weep for 45 minutes and then go back home. The bishop was put on probation and given 300 hours of community service, which he worked off in a nursing home in Miami, where, as he was helping an old man into the bathtub, the bishop fell and hit his head on the rim, as a result of which he left the Lutheran Church and went into the Church of Christ. And he is living now down near Tupelo in a pickup truck out in the woods, and he does a 15-minute radio program carried over 45 stations in the South called The Hour of Prophecy, in which he talks a lot about how a certain verse in Hosea makes it very clear that God would like the capital gains tax taken away. So here are three Lutherans who've come on the rocks, and meanwhile, the Hanno people go on just as they always had, just like dandelions. It makes you think that maybe we're on the wrong side. I thought about that during that thunderstorm. I thought life ought to be much clearer to me than it is. A lot of people felt that way in the midst of all that power and all that violence and majesty. The Tolleroods, Diane Tollerood, came back home. She's Daryl's youngest sister. She came back home, and they were awakened by the thunderstorm. They got up at 3 o'clock in the morning and sat in the kitchen, and they drank coffee. And she told them more about her life than they really want to know. sitting down there and talking about how she's come to realize now that a person never gets better, that life is just a constant process of healing and therapy, that life is not a destination, it's a journey. They sat and listened to it, and their hearts sank, as they have so often, over Diane. She was the youngest girl, and she went to Minneapolis, and she got into some things. She became a teller in a bank, and she was doing well, and she was planning to go to the university. And then there was a bank robbery, and she was held hostage for 6 days with 7 other women. They were blindfolded, and they were put into a panel truck, and they were taken to tourist cabins up near Lake Winnebagoshis by the robber. And they were up there all together, and it just changed her life. They were up there with the robber, whose name was Dwayne, and the women were all crying, and Dwayne was crying too, and he was talking about his father and how this emotional distance between himself and his father had always been a cloud in his life, and how his father was always angry at him, and he expressed anger by ignoring Dwayne. All the women sat there blindfolded, their hands tied in front of them. They were all crying and holding on to each other. And Dwayne said he felt that in many ways this robbery had been his attempt to communicate with his father and break through this emotional distance. And the women started talking about their fathers as well, and they agreed that this was an experience that they would never forget and that would change the rest of their lives. And when Dwayne finally left, they all hugged him, and they promised to keep in touch with him if possible. And when the sheriff came in, the women looked at the sheriff in anger and disgust. They said, "This has nothing to do with you. Guns aren't going to solve this. This has nothing to do with guns. This has to do with people's lives. Can't you see that?" Diane is still working through issues that were raised for her by this experience. And that was 15 years ago. She's 42 years old. She's 42 years old. It breaks their heart to ever meet her. This dear woman, she's so lovely, and she's so smart, and she's so funny most of the time, and then suddenly she needs to talk about things. She was there with her boyfriend. They don't know his name. He's been her boyfriend for 8 years, and she's told them his name. They think maybe it's Kent or Brent, but they just call him the boyfriend. Among themselves, they never address him by name. He's an odd guy, not somebody you'd ever want to introduce to anybody else anyway. You look at him, and your first thought is, should a man be spending that much time on his hair every day? Is that right? Doesn't he have better things to do? He's kind of a short guy with long brown hair that bears the marks of frequent care, and horn-rimmed glasses. He's a very intense listener, and he looks at you, and he listens. And he says, "Cool." Cool. That's cool. He was not awakened by the storm. He lay up in bed until 10 o'clock that morning. It breaks their heart to see this young woman. She went away so strong, and somehow she became so fragile. She's been in so many groups and been through so much therapy. She believes in the therapy of storytelling. And every day she and the boyfriend sit down and they share, for as long as it takes, everything that happened to them so far that day. They talk it over, all of it. And you're astonished at the emotional freight in simple things. A trip to the grocery store, the choice of kohlrabi over Brussels sprouts. his taking hold of the shopping cart, even though he knows that she likes to push the shopping cart. All of these things have to be laid out. All of this baggage, the underwear has to be spread out, and the socks, and all of this has to be thought about. You walk out to the barn with her, Dwayne does, and they're talking about good times when they were children, and she's happy, and then on her way back into the house, she stops you and she says, "When you mentioned that time when I was little and I fell through a hole in the haymow into the calves' pen, was there a reason that you brought that up? Was that just something that you just thought of that moment? Or were you in some way, as I felt you were you enjoying thinking about that one more time? Were you wanting to experience the reality of that one more time?" Such a fragile, fragile person. Well, she and Marilyn went into town the morning after the big thunderstorm, and the boyfriend slept upstairs. Darryl went out and looked at the fields, which were still too wet to get into. He came into the house, and the boyfriend was up. He had done his hair. He was fixing his bran flakes, his yogurt, his seeds, sitting at the table. He looked at Darryl and he said, "It would be really cool," he said, "if I could help with some chores or something. I could really get into that." "Okay," Darryl said, "I think that can be arranged." And he said another cool thing he think would be if I could, like make contact with other people in the community. I just think that would be cool, Darryl said, "Well, that would be possible too." He said, I'm a member of a men's group that gets together. They might be meeting tonight, I don't know. We could see. Called the Sons of Bernie. The boyfriend looked at him. "Cool," he said. "Sons of Bernie. Yeah, they get together," Darryl said. "They get together and, we have a pretty good time. We drink a little beer, we talk a little bit." He said, "There is a kind of a tradition at the Sons of Bernie whenever an outsider comes in that they ask you to do. I should point this out before you meet them so it won't be a surprise." "Cool," he said. Darryl said, "I don't know where this tradition comes from. I don't remember. It must come from someplace. But it's an old tradition that whenever a newcomer comes in, they put a quarter on a wooden bench, and the newcomer is supposed to drop his trousers and pick up the quarter between his cheeks." "I see," said the boyfriend. "That's really far out," he said. "Is that possible to do?" he said, "without using your hands?" "Well," Darryl said, "if you used your hands, then what would be the point of taking your pants down?" "Cool," he said. Anyway, Darryl said, that's the tradition. He went back out to work in the barn, and when he was in the barn, he saw Marilyn and Diane drive up in the car. Diane had seen the high school in town, which had brought back long submerged childhood memories. She was upset. She needed to talk about these things. And she went into the house. Marilyn came out to talk to Darryl. And evidently, when Diane went into the house, she discovered the boyfriend practicing the ritual of the Sons of Bernie. He must have been very intent on it because he never noticed her. He was trying it over and over again without much success. He just didn't have very prehensile cheeks, I guess. But he wasn't giving up. Darrell was out in the barn, and he heard the screen door slap shut, and he looked out the door, and he could see his sister Diane walking across the yard towards him. And he knew that she had something to say to him right now. He knew that she had a lot on her mind that she had to discuss with him right now. The whole world was green and gorgeous and verdant, and there were flowers and birds and music and smells everywhere. The world was full of life, and she didn't notice it for a minute. She stalked across that farmyard, stalked across like somebody who's carrying a quarter in their butt. If you go around carrying a quarter in your butt, you won't think of anything else. That's the news from Lake Wobegon, where all the women are strong, all the men are good looking, and all the children are above average.
Hello, it's Garrison Keeler from A Prairie Home Companion, hoping you're having a good summer. We're going to have a wonderful summer at A Prairie Home with our big rhubarb tour, visiting state fairs and traveling all over the country with Susie Bogus, Fred Newman, the Guy's All-Star Shoe Band, Guy Noir, Private Eye, the news from Lake Wobegon, and so forth. For ticket information, you can visit us at prairiehome.org. The show we've always wanted to do, so we hope we'll see you this summer. The News from Lake Wobegon podcast is brought to you by Honey Nut Cheerios Cereal. Made with whole grain oats, Honey Nut Cheerios Cereal can help lower your cholesterol. Honey Nut Cheerios. Be happy, be healthy.